An entire world is ready
for you to start your career teaching the path to wellness,
mastering the science of mindfulness,
and the art of coaching
to help clients achieve mental, emotional, and physical betterment of life
through movement,
nutrition,
recovery, and regeneration.
Because impacting one person impacts a family.
Impacting a family impacts a community.
And impacting a community impacts the world.
Become an NASM certified wellness coach.
You're listening to Random Fit with hosts Wendy Batts and Ken Miller, winner of a Gold Markham Award for Digital Media.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's episode of Random Fit with myself, Wendy Batts, here with my friend and colleague, Mr. Ken Miller. Ken, how are you today?
Awesome, Wendy. You?
Living a dream, as always. Well, I am going to say I am extremely excited about today's topic. A, because I had not done any research about it. And B, until you started talking about it, I found it absolutely fascinating. And I am going to say, and from the start, that this is something that some people believe in and some people don't. So I would be very interested for your comments once we're done to see what you guys think, because there is some truth to what we're going to talk about.
Yeah, and on today's episode of Random Fit, we are talking about blue zones and, you know, what they have found when they've looked at these blue zones, and I'll give the story about that later. But when they look at where people who are living to 100 and older, you know, what are some of the things that go into facilitating the environment and the lifestyle that helps these people live such long lives? And just a little backstory on where the inspiration for this episode came from. I was watching Netflix, and yes, Wendy, I do watch a little bit of TV.
Find the time.
Yeah.
Teach me.
Do we call it TV anymore? I mean, I was streaming Netflix and I was watching this show, and I watched a few episodes of this series called Down to Earth, hosted by Zac Efron. If those of you that are familiar with High School Musical, I have nieces, so yes, I have heard of Zac Efron and High School Musical. But he's a co-host with Darian Olean. Sorry, no offense. But they basically go around the world and they go to these cities, and you know, they look at healthy, sustainable lifestyles that are done in these different cities around the world, different places around the world. But on this episode, they were exploring blue zones, and they visited a town in Italy, a region of Italy called Sardinia, and they went to a village where they have a high percentage, well, a higher population than most other cities of centenarians, and they were looking at how they live their lives. And that's what really caught my interest. Well, how are they, you know, to the point where you have, you know, people that are living well into their 90s and into 100 years old and a little bit older, but you know, what are the things that are affecting their lifestyle to help them live long and, you know, prosper when it comes to getting on into the later ages. But they interviewed one of the doctors that were part of the demographic studies and looking at different areas in the world where you have a higher concentration of centenarians, as I think it's called nanogenarians, that are those that are above the age of 90. And they've come up with what they call blue zones. And the story that they tell on that episode of Down to Earth is the fact that when they were marking areas that had these people that were 100 years old, they were using a blue pen. And this was the interesting part of the show, is that they were marking areas on the map that had these centenarians, and they were marking it with a blue pen. But the regions that had higher concentration of these blue dots, they called them blue zones. So how they came up with the name blue zones was the fact that they were using a blue pen to mark the map of where they were living. And they came up with 5 different areas around the world where they found people that were able to live into from the 90s into 100 plus years old. So that is what I found really interesting. And the fact that, when they bring up these cities, people were living long lives for different reasons, but it's also reduced down to what they call the Power Nine, or the 9 reasons they've found that contribute to people living longer.
And on today's podcast of Random Fit with myself, Wendy Batts, and Ken Miller, we're talking about blue zones. And Ken kind of gave the background of why they call it blue zones. But basically, it's why are people in certain regions of the entire world living longer over others? What are they doing different that maybe we're not incorporating in our lifestyle? And so, Ken, I found it interesting because, like you said, there was 5 particular, specific areas that they pinpointed the most. And it was Italy, Japan, Costa Rica, there was Greece, and then, of course, I found this one interesting. It was Loma Linda, California. Yeah. And I was like, I know that when I think of California, of course I think of you, but I think of many of my friends, they are pretty much, they're just chill in comparison to someone like myself. And, we're going to talk, like you said, kind of the 9 habits they do that they don't think about. And I think that was the one thing that intrigued me the most. When they're looking at these habits, it's not something that they even call a habit. It's just their life, that it's something they do automatically, and one of the things was when you're looking at someone that was in Okinawa, Japan, it was, they are growing gardens. They're just doing their thing. They're managing their vegetables. They find peace within themselves doing that. And they're not worried about retirement, the stresses of what they've got to do, their kids coming home from school, what their homework's going to be. It literally is, they're in that moment doing what they want to do, providing for their community and their family to make a really good dinner in that moment. And I was like, gosh, I need to go grow a garden. That would be phenomenal. But it makes sense. It totally made sense to me.
Right. And again, getting into the other 9, it does paint the bigger picture of the different aspects of what goes into living long. And one of the things that I really found interesting is that, based on their exercise habits, movement habits, their social involvement with the community and family, again, exercise, nutrition, all the things that we've talked about in other episodes of Random Fit. But it's different levels and different, I guess, schemes, if you will, that have been incorporated. I mean, this is their culture. This is how they've grown. Because I think when it came to that episode of Down to Earth, and that village that they were visiting, it wasn't just this generation of people that were living into their 90s and 100s. Their mothers and their grandmothers were living just as long. But the other part of it is the fact that you're living this long and you still have your wits about you, right? And because in my opinion, what good is it to live a long life if you don't have your faculties about you and you're not there to actually live that life, versus, you're under medication, you're under whatever conditions that your mental state allows you to be in. But you listed off the cities or the regions of the world where these blue zones are, Wendy. But like I said, they're there on that list for different reasons or different areas of focus. But what you brought up with Okinawa, Japan, I mean, just culturally, one of the things that in my reading, again, looking at the book and what they've shown on the Blue Zones Project website, they've given some insight on that, and the fact that we're also talking about a region of well, actually in the Asian culture, you have multi-generational households where grandma, great grandma, grandpa, great grandpa are living under the same roof. And one of the things that I read about with that is that if you have, if my grandparents were living with us, which they did, when my parents would work, it was my grandparents that stayed at home with me and with my brothers. But here's the thing: when your parents or your parents' parents are ill, you don't just let them sit there and be sick. You take them to the hospital, you get them seen, you get them checked out, and you make sure that they're healthy. So the immediacy of medical or health care is definitely a factor, because if they're ill, they're not ill long, or they find resolution, whatever resolution can be found, as soon as they possibly can. So it's not like somebody gets sick, right, and then they're sick, and then it becomes one thing becomes another. They get them well sooner, because I know if it were my parents, if they were ill, it's like, hey, let's go take care of this right now.
Well, and to piggyback off that, I know, we had mentioned that there's a book out there, and I think it's called The Power Nine, and basically it's by Dan, and hopefully I don't say it wrong, but Buettner, I think is how you would say his last name. And, we just talked obviously about, moving more naturally and thinking about gardening and stuff. And then, like you just said, another one of those, Ken, is loved ones first. And to your point, yes, it is being close to family, but when you're reading more about it, it was saying specifically that this means that, like you said, they're keeping their aging parents closer and their grandparents nearby. Everyone is going to be together. Some people may run from that thought process, while others embrace the family togetherness and take that for what it is. But it was saying too that that being closer to family is going to lower disease and mortality rates of children that are in that home. So to your point, but then also that they are committing to a partner for life. So obviously divorce and changes of partners is minimized in these specific zones. And when they do that they are increasing 3 years of life expectancy, and because of the reduce of stress. And so I found all of that fascinating, because when you look at the divorce rates in other places, they're extremely high, but in these particular areas that we listed out, they're very low. And I found that very interesting. Makes sense though.
Yeah. And one of the other points that, ranked higher as far as what piqued my interest was the fact that, when we talk about life and being with family, one of the things that you can kind of piggyback onto that is having purpose. What the Okinawans call ikigai. I hope I pronounced that right, but I guess if we're talking about Costa Rica and Okinawa, we're going to have to say a couple of names that we're not used to, but ikigai, and that's what they call their plan de vida. This is what gets them out of bed in the morning and gets them, going about things with purpose and with intention. So if you have a reason to get up in the morning outside of, okay, my dog needs to go out, I need to take my dog for a walk, but having purpose and needing to accomplish something in your day, that's one of the things that they've found, and especially a point of interest when it comes to the Blue Zone in Okinawa, Japan.
Indeed.
But we've talked about stress management, again, to move on to another point. When it comes to healthy living and managing stress, but that was one of the trends that they found in these cities, is that they've also found ways to manage stress. So if it happened, so one of the blue zones, again, Okinawa was another one that came up for this particular point, was that things happen, right, and it may not always go your way, but the idea here is that, hey, it's water off my back, it's water under the bridge, right? It's done, right? It happened, it's done. Let's go have a drink and just move on to the next thing. So when it comes to managing stress, you let these things happen, and because it's going to, right? Things are going to happen to you, but then you just move on. You move on with your day. So managing stress from the perspective that, okay, that was a moment in time. I'm not going to dwell on it. I'm not going to let it eat me up. I'm not going to let it take up more space and time in my brain than it needs to. But, let's move on to the next thing. So when it comes to managing stress, let's go have a beer. Let's relax and enjoy who we're with. because again, if you're living with your children and your children's children and someone's taking care of you, hey, what have you got to stress about, right?
Good point. And today on Random Fit, myself, Wendy Batts, with Ken Miller, are talking about the blue zones. And what that means is basically, why are certain people in different regions living longer than others? And so we did talk about, moving more naturally. We talked about having a purpose and reducing stress. And another one I thought was interesting is the 80% rule that they have. So when they sit down for a meal, they only allow themselves to be 80% full, because they leave that 20% gap not to be hungry. So that way they feel better. They don't feel as sluggish. And it's also good for gaining weight, losing weight, depending on which way you want to look at that. But then they also eat the smallest meal at the end of their day, and they eat it early, late afternoon or early evening. And then they don't eat anymore the rest of the day. So they do more of their bigger meals in the morning. They move around all day. They flow more freely throughout the day. Like you said, they're trying to reduce stress or not even worry about things, and, work in their gardens. And so I, found that fascinating, because I eat so fast personally because I don't have a lot of time. So I'm shoving food in my mouth. And then like 20 minutes later, I feel like I'm going to just bust. I'm so full. Yeah. I'm miserable. I want to take a nap, and I don't have time to sit around and feel that way. And so I think really being, like you said, purposeful, even when you're eating, and thinking about that rule could be super beneficial for myself personally, but then it makes sense.
Well, there's a lot that goes into eating slowly, right? And I've learned from a workshop that when you chew, and you chew a lot, right? And that gives us that chewing signal. If you have enough chewing going on, you start to send the signal to your brain that, all right, this guy is consuming calories, right? So the brain's getting a signal that there's calories coming in. From the food standpoint, you're breaking it down, you're making it easier to digest, so that 20 minutes, Wendy, that 20 minutes later when you're all blown up after that big meal. Well, chewing also slows down the eating process. Well, it takes you longer and allows the receptors to catch up and say, hey, this is how full you are. And by the time you sense it, if you've eaten slow enough, you haven't gone way past, your threshold before the receptors have a chance to catch up. So chewing a lot, eating slower. One thing I picked up from one of my Japanese friends is like, for the way he was raised is that, eating with chopsticks, you put the chopsticks down and you eat, you chew your food, and then when you're ready to take the next bite, you pick up your chopsticks and you eat again. Versus us here in the US, typically you just shovel that food that you're talking about, when you just shovel it in your mouth, and before you know it, you're done and you're blown up, and there's that 80, you well gone past your 80% of consumption for that day. So there's a lot of benefits too to eating slow and taking your time and letting your body catch up to where you actually are in that meal. But have you ever heard the phrase, eat breakfast, your first meal, like a king, eat your lunch or your second meal like a prince, and eat your dinner like a pauper or a poor person? Yeah.
Yes. And you know what? I wish I could do that. I really wish, because breakfast is one of my all-time favorite meals. I love it. I don't like to cook it. I love to go out for it, which is also kind of a problem. But when I go out, especially if it's for breakfast, I will have that as my biggest meal, because I'm not cooking it. I'm not cleaning up after it. So it makes it better. But usually during the week, I don't have that flexibility because of my schedule. So I just eat something small on the go or whatever it is, and then eat, bigger meals later, which unfortunately I think is common among a lot of Americans, that we eat our biggest meal and usually dinner, because we're done with work and we're usually done with some of the stuff of the day, unless you're still running around, your kids around for events. But another, to your point, we've talked about eating, when you're looking at the diets as well. I mean, that was a big thing too. They called it Plant Smart, and that they were looking at really, having their diet consists of a lot of beans and soy and lentils. And, when you're looking, they try to limit their meat intake to only a size of a deck of cards. And the meat of choice is usually pork. And I was like, who knew? I mean, again, I love all meats. And I found that interesting too, because I would have thought it would have been beef. And so for it to be mainly pork in those regions, I found that a little fascinating.
Yeah, and I think that's an American bias when it comes to all that. But lean meats, like you said, chicken came up, but pork wound up being, the meat of choice, in that in what you were reading. But again, it's the portion size that meant everything. But when it came to, and we talked about Loma Linda being a blue zone, well, they have, in the foundation there for their reason primarily for having that high focus of centenarians was, they ate primarily vegetarian, and some did have some meat, but that's everything that they were eating, legumes, more plant-based nutrition and diet, and that's one of the big focuses there. But going into the next point when we talk about nutrition and food and intake, and we talked about this already when it came to managing stress, was drinking wine, and having, and it was a moderate, in our by our standards, light to moderate intake of wine. And as we've had our registered dietitian of choice, Miss Kat Bearfield, on before, we talked about alcohol consumption. Again, within moderation, there can be protective factors, as far as heart health goes with when it comes to the consumption of wine. But again, to put that in perspective, having one at 5 o'clock earlier in the day versus, right before bed, timing is going to affect sleep and all that. But having some wine intake through the day can have some protective properties for when it comes to heart health. So that was actually a nice one to see, because now it's like, oh, maybe I should break out that bottle that's been sitting there since the holidays, right? But
I'm going to agree with that. And when I thought too, I love the fact that it said all zones. It was like all of them, them. It wasn't just like, oh, here's a couple. Every one of those drink regular or moderately, moderately to regularly. And I thought it was interesting too, because as you read along and you're looking and researching more about what that means, how they were saying 1 to 2 glasses a day. And I was like, wow, that just seems, again, we think of it as a caloric intake, how much sugar, instead of looking at the reds or whatever it is being, antioxidants and timed socially with your friends. I thought it was interesting where they were like, don't drink all of them on Saturday. You can't save up for the whole week and drink it all in one day. Like, that's not the thing. And, but I loved that as well, because, we always hear alcohol is so negative, and it just, this is again, longevity. That's what we're talking about today on Random Fit with myself, Wendy Batts, and Ken Miller. Blue zones. Why do people live long and prosper in comparison to other regions? And, another one that I also felt was, it makes sense, was, belonging, whether you're belonging to a faith-based community, you're just in your community being a part, or, of togetherness, and that it's not, they did talk a lot, and we mentioned about family and being close to your family, but it's also being close to those that have the same beliefs as you. And they welcome these ideas and work together as a community. It makes sense. But when you're looking at all these research, these people are attending these community events over 4 times a month. And when you're looking at what the life expectancy is for those individuals that do that, it could be an increase of 4 to 14 years. And I, was like, that it makes sense. Having people around you and belonging, giving you purpose for every day you wake up, that it all seems to, it's all intertwined, Ken.
Yeah, they definitely, all the points do blend together, but they were able to, again, they were doing these demographic studies, and that's why, to look at the population, they had very specific questions on, hey, why are you still around? Well, that's not negatively, but how are you doing this, right? And so when we talk about sense of belonging, again, a lot of these centenarians have, most of them, not all, but most of them had a faith-based perspective on life, and that sense of belonging and being a part of a bigger energy, if you will, when it comes to being on this planet now. and we already talked about the loved ones, right? Being around family, that was a big factor. Again, multi-generational households and being a part of it. So that is, in a sense, that feeds into that sense of belonging, whether it's that higher being, or in this case, we are talking about being with family. Again, nothing. What gives you more purpose than, to know that you have those that you love around you every day, if it's possible. But the last part is now dealing with, or now addressing, who you surround yourself with, right? Who are those people in your life that you choose to be with? As the saying goes, you are a representative of the 5 people closest to you. And I wholeheartedly believe it. And it was just confirmed, when it came to reading about blue zones here. But, when we talk about friends, having that social life and being able to, if I need to unload, if I need to have a sounding board, I know who I'm going to call, right? I have my 4 buddies who I grew up with basically since kindergarten. Believe it or not, Wendy, I have this group of friends of mine that we've known each other since kindergarten, 1st grade, and one of them, Sherman. Shout out to Sherman. I know he's listening. But my dad drove his mom to the hospital when he was being born, and he was born 2 weeks after I was. So I literally known him, since I was a baby. But he is one of those guys that I can call speed dial if there's anything that's on my mind. And having that tribe and surrounding yourself with people that you can count on and rely on and have fun with, more importantly, that was a big factor as far as how these people are able to socially interact, and the quality of social interaction that they do have.
Well, and another, I thought, interesting fact too, when we're looking at these, 9 habits and we're talking about it, this is the stuff that we talk about all the time, Ken. We talk about, fitness journeys and trying to, have a network of people that you can trust and rely on, and talk about the things that are working and not, and keeping journals and growing and eating more organically, and watch your portion size, and don't give up the things you enjoy, and go out and do things. And so, when we're looking about all of these 9 points that we made, I'm like, man, check. All of it makes so much sense, but we don't do that. Things that they were talking about, stressors. And I know I fall victim to this, retirement, worrying about money, worrying about like sickness, worrying about your, someone getting injured, where some of these things are out of your control. Some of them are in your control, but you have to just have beliefs that whatever it is you're setting yourself up for is going to be positive. But you're in control. And another thing, when we're talking about, this book in particular, they were saying that, they feel with the research that they found, especially within these blue zones, and what they're finding more and more about just people's genes and genetic makeup, that 25% of like your longevity is based off your genes, and the other 75% you're in control of. And so, I think one of the biggest keys, and my biggest wrap up, is like, we really do have, the ability to live as long as we want, as long as we make smart choices, and, and we fight the battle.
We fight. Yeah. And yeah. And again, it just tells us that there is a big picture, right? There is as you said, Wendy, 20% of why we're going to live long is that's in your DNA. You can't really do anything about that, but you control the other 75%. And that was my biggest takeaway after reading, about these blue zones. So, if you're like me, you're on the back half of this play that we're in, and we're all just actors, right? What can we do to enhance that and make it a prosperous and productive life when it comes to, okay, I've got 50 more years to hit that 100-year mark. But no, so I'm going to make some change. I'm going to make some calls. Actually, I'm going to call some friends as soon as we're done recording here. But I know you, Wendy, are one of them. So,
yeah. Yes. They say whoever you surround yourself with as well. I mean, You're growing up with some of these individuals. I am stuck with the 2 Millers and my husband a lot too. As some of my girlfriends. So there could be worse people to be around. So I'm very fortunate. And, you know, the people you surround yourself with, I think really do make you smarter, and they really get you. And I really enjoyed this, Ken. I was so excited when you brought it up. I learned a ton of information because I had never heard about this before. And just, I don't know. I really liked digging into the research. Just kept wanting to do more and more. So.
Yeah, well, Dan Buettner does have a book, so, you know, easy plug for that. But hey, Wendy, thanks for sharing this time with me here on Random Fit and talking about blue zones and living long and prospering. So, look, you know, thanks for your perspective on things. And again, I do consider you one of my 5 favorite people on earth when it comes to people outside my bloodline. So thanks for being here.
Back at you, dude.
Yeah. All right. So thank you all for spending your time here with us here on Random Fit. If there's other things you want to hear about, you know, blue zones, but I guess we can explore some of these other specific sides of the blue zones. But whatever it may be, let us know by following, subscribing, commenting. You can also reach us on our social, which flashes up on the screen every now and then during the recording. But thank you so much. We really couldn't do this without you all. So let us know. But until then, next time, take care and be well.